Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World, where every word matters. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Georgia finds itself at a critical juncture as tensions between the pro-Western President Salome Zourabichvili and the ruling Georgian Dream party escalate, with Georgian Dream threatening legal action if Zourabichvili refused to vacate her ceremonial role. Protests have erupted over concerns of increasing authoritarianism and a suspension of EU accession talks. The standoff could define Georgia's democratic future. So joining us today on TVP World to discuss these unfolding events is Nicholas Chkhaidze, Research Fellow at the Topchubashov Center. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you for having me.
So first thing first, just to set the backdrop, how do we even get here in the first place? This political standoff we're seeing right now is quite a high level of political crisis.
Well, indeed, yes. The political crisis in Georgia has reached a boiling point as the country prepares for a critical moment on December 29th today, when the future of the presidency remains in question. Well, we know that Salome Zourabichvili, who is a pro-Western leader and a symbolic figure of the opposition and a representative of the Georgian people, is expected to hand over the keys of the presidential office to her successor, Mikhail Avalishvili, but who's a former footballer and a far-right politician who has certain anti-Western and pro-Russian sentiments. And he's also a representative of the GD, Georgian Dream party. We know that Zourabichvili refuses to step down. She denounced the GD-led government and she accused the government of being illegitimate. And this standoff, in a way, has ignited mass protests in Georgia. And as we speak now, there are two meetings that are coinciding. One is the Avalishvili's, our incoming president's inauguration ceremony, as well as Zourabichvili's speech at the presidential palace, where she's trying to deliver her message to the Georgian people of what the next steps should be. But those tensions have been escalating since the October elections, and which many believe to be flawed and rigged. So in the end, we have to see how Zourabichvili delivers her message and what will be the action plan for the next several days or weeks.
Right, like you mentioned, there's been a little bit of ebb and flow when it comes to these tensions, starting from the election, and then we saw very widespread protests when Georgia decided to postpone its EU accession talks. And now I think with this presidency, well, perhaps outgoing, there's going to be another wave of tensions. Do you foresee another protest on the scale of the previous one?
Well, yes, the Georgian people have been very vocal in their support for Zourabichvili because she, in a way, represents the will of the Georgian people, which is a pro-Western path and a pro-West European trajectory. There was a survey conducted not too long ago, according to which 70% of Georgians consider her to be their president, and the other remaining 30% consider Avalishvili, the incoming president, to be the one that represents the Georgian people. So even now, as we speak, there are thousands and thousands of people gathered at the presidential palace, where Zourabichvili is trying to deliver her message. And I believe that depending on how the message is delivered, that could, in a way, contribute to rising tensions and more people going to protest, and that could, in a way, contribute to protests becoming more and more massive.
All right. We do know that the presidential position in Georgia has more of a ceremonial role compared to a lot of different countries and comparing to its parliament. Do you think that Zourabichvili staying in that position would have any substantial kind of change when it comes to this particular situation? Or, like you mentioned, perhaps it's more symbolic and for the Georgian people to express their will?
I believe it's more symbolic. She and the presidents in Georgia, since the constitutional amendments were put in place years ago, that really limits the power of the president. She does not hold powers that could really have significant effect in terms of resolving this constitutional crisis. But in the end, it all comes down to her just being there and representing people of Georgia. What's more is that we've seen the reactions from the U.S.-led organizations, as well as U.S. government and congressmen and senators, that they welcomed, for example, the sanctions on GD's puppet master, so to speak, Bidzina, And there is a congressman that really stands out in all of this developments, which is Joe Wilson. He has been vocal in his criticism of GD, and he was the one that was really pushing forward the agenda and advocating for sanctions on Ivanishvili and GD. What's more is that actually it was Zourabichvili that was invited to the inauguration of Donald Trump rather than Qabalashvili. So that really is a symbolic gesture from the U.S. saying that Zourabichvili is the legitimate president and not Qabalashvili in this case.
All right. You mentioned the name Ivanishvili and, well, naming him as the puppet master. Can you shed some light about who this individual is and what's his role in all of this?
So Ivanishvili, essentially, here in Georgia, everybody knows that he really is a informal ruler of Georgia. He has been behind the scenes and trying to control the way in which policy is being made and how our government is conducting its actions. Ivanishvili, even though he has been behind the scenes, well, everybody knows that what he really stands for. But he was, as we've said, he was sanctioned on December 27th under the Executive Order 14024, and that's for Russian harmful foreign activities. And these sanctions were actually announced by Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, and he accused Ivanishvili of enabling human rights abuses, undermining democratic institutions, and derailing Georgia's Euro-Atlantic integration. And those actions have, of course, they are seen as benefiting Russia. So we have to consider the fact that those sanctions are not quite Magnitsky level, so to speak. Even though the sanctions freeze Ivanishvili's assets within U.S. Jurisdiction, and they prohibit transactions by U.S. persons or companies involving his property or specific restrictions to a certain case in Singapore involving Credit Suisse Trust. And the Treasury Department, I believe, also emphasized the broader implications of Ivanishvili's actions in strengthening Russian influence in Georgia, which, in a way, sends a symbolic message from the U.S. that indeed it's Ivanishvili, the informal ruler of Georgia, that's sort of trying to contribute to Russian influence being more and more active in Georgia. And we have to consider that Executive Order 14024 has only been targeting Russians and Belarusians tied to Putin's war in Ukraine. And for the first time in Georgian history, a Georgian, Ivanishvili, has faced this sort of sanction. And his Kremlin ties make him an exception in a way, as we know that he had a bold stance. He was trying to play this role of a pro-Western guy, even though he has always had this Russian influence and policy in government. And the biggest misinformation that the Georgian Dream and Ivanishvili has been trying to spread is that, once January 20th comes and Donald Trump takes office, we'll be able to sort of mend our ties with the U.S. By the way, the U.S. has suspended strategic partnership with Georgia because of all of these developments. And that, in the end, turned out to be wrong because Trump's administration is comprised of people that are very anti-Ivanishvili, and they have this message box already sort of created for the Georgian Dream government that friends of China and Iran are not welcome for U.S. incoming administration.
Right. So at this point, is there any democratic institution or democratic process that can give the Georgian people their voice and make it clear that their pro-Western aspiration is at least being challenged in a democratic way?
Well, that's a difficult case because we're essentially dealing with a case of state capture, whereas there is not a single institution left except the presidency, which Zourabichvili represents, that can really contribute to Georgian people's will of a pro-Western aspiration being enforced. So it all comes down to Zourabichvili and what she can really bring to the table and whether or not she can have enough power and influence over the Georgian people to sort of be this bulwark of pro-Western integration. That Well, it really depends on the circumstances that will take place today, as we're now dealing with a constitutional crisis that nobody knows how it's really going to end, depending on how Zourabichvili frames her message and whether or not the Georgian Dream is going to compromise. But nobody really expects Georgian Dream to compromise, since historically speaking, whenever they tried to compromise, that never really was a compromise. They were just creating groundwork for something even worse. So we're not expecting things to be very positive in that regard.
So where do you see all this going? Do you think at some point the Georgian Dream Party will use some sort of force to try to throw Zourabichvili out of office?
Well, that's essentially what the plan is, I believe, because as the inauguration is over, I've seen in the news that the Georgian Dream leadership has been saying that they were going to, Abalashvili was going to continue his presidency and the presidential work in the Orbeliani Palace, which is the presidential palace where Zourabichvili is currently residing. What's more is that during a briefing a week ago, Georgian Prime Minister Chkhaidze issued two direct threats of imprisonment against Zourabichvili if she did not comply with what he called to be a lawful demand of leaving the presidential palace. So what we're expecting is essentially, in terms of domestic action, I believe there will be permanent protests. But in terms of international action, we believe that has been already reflected by our Western partners that they're just trying to isolate GD. And I think it fundamentally has a power structure that resembles a house of cards situation, in terms that if Ivanishvili, considering that these sanctions, the executive order, is not quite Magnitsky level, that really leaves room for maneuvering for Ivanishvili. So that could be his last resort in terms of trying to back down and eventually retreat from all of this. Otherwise, if he doubles down and if he really goes all in, then that could have a significant, let's say, effect on his financial status as well as his family members, because this sanctions do not yet include family members, but Magnitsky list will definitely do that. So the U.S. has given Ivanishvili a little bit of time and a window to try to just back down and retreat from this current situation.
Right, so it does look like the political situation in Georgia is facing a break point. And like you mentioned, these protests are currently happening. We'll have to see how it develops. In the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers. And thank you for watching this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.